The snow came without warning. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was a wall of white swallowing the trail ahead. Ruth Ann Carter pulled her shawl tighter, the wind tearing at the fabric as if to drag it away. The pass had been called safe, maps held up beside a campfire, a finger tracing an easy line through mountains that didn't answer to men's promises. The wagon master believed it, or needed to. Folks with children believed the things they must. Before the mountains, she'd been somebody different. In Kansas, she'd kept a small room above a seamstress shop, worked as a midwife when called. There were nights a woman's hand held her wrist like a drowning thing, and mornings when a baby's cry made even the poorest kitchen feel like a church. She'd been engaged once to a quiet Union soldier who loved newspapers and the sound of trains. He never did come home. The letter called it fever. The silence that followed said other things. After that came a land agent with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, preaching opportunity to freed families and widows. Paper deeds, surveyor stakes, promises and lies written faster than you can blink. When men like that start knowing your name, it's time to move along. The wagon train west wasn't just travel, it was escape with a heartbeat. The attack on the trail was brief and vicious. Men who had followed the train for days, waiting for the weather to do their work. They weren't soldiers, and they weren't brave. They came looking for money and to sow chaos, the kind of men that take when the world looks away. Ruth Ann saw one club the wagon master while another laughed, already stripping the harness from a panicked horse. Screams carried thin on the wind, wood splintered like bone. Someone prayed, someone else cursed God for not listening. She didn't stay to see the end. She cut her mule free with hands that could barely feel the knife and ran for her life. The sound of splintering wood and desperate shouts fell behind her, swallowed by the wind. What she didn't realize was that one of them turned as she disappeared into the white and marked that shape against the storm. A witness can hang a man. Some men do whatever it takes to keep a rope off their neck. By nightfall, the train had scattered. Horses panicked, wheels broken, canvas torn loose and skittering like ghosts across the flats. She'd been walking for hours, half blind, one hand on the reins of a mule that wanted to quit as badly as she did. The animal finally stopped, ears laid flat. That's when she saw it. A faint orange glow through the snow. A cabin. Smoke curling weakly from its chimney like a prayer that hadn't given up yet. She pushed forward, each step a bargain with pain. By the time she reached the door, her fingers wouldn't close around the handle. She hit it once with her shoulder, then again, and fell through. The warmth struck her like a blow. A fire burned in the hearth, low but alive, and beside it stood a man. Tall. Broad, a shadow cut out of firelight. He didn't move at first, just watched her from under the brim of a weather-worn hat, as if deciding whether she was real. Her voice cracked when it came. "Please, I just need to get warm." He set down the rifle he'd been holding, not aimed but ready, and crossed the floor in slow, measured steps. When he reached her, he didn't speak. He simply took her arm and guided her closer to the fire, his hand rough but careful. The light showed the lines on his face, the kind carved by sun, not age, and a scar that ran from his temple down beneath his collar. A man built of silence. He handed her a blanket without looking her in the eye. "You're lucky the storm brought you here." His gaze slid to the window. "Another hour out there, it wouldn't have mattered what you were running from." She didn't answer. Not yet. The only sound was the fire cracking, the storm clawing at the walls, and the slow, steady rhythm of his boots as he walked back to the window. For the first time in days, heat crawled back into her bones and fear loosened its grip. Behind that warmth, something else stirred. Curiosity. Who was this man living alone at the edge of nowhere, carrying his silence like a wound? And why did his gaze, brief as it was, feel like a question she wasn't ready to answer? Outside, the storm screamed against the glass. Inside, the silence between them held its own kind of thunder. Morning came gray and thin, the kind of light that didn't so much arrive as admit defeat. She woke to coffee and wood smoke. Her body ached where the cold had left her, but she was alive, which was more than she'd expected the night before. The cabin was small but sturdy. A table, 2 chairs, a shelf of tools that looked used once and then put away for good. Near the fire, the man sat with his hat in his hands, staring into the flames like they owed him an answer. "Storm's not done," he said without looking up. "You'll be here a while." His voice had the same weight as before, steady even when it said little. "I'll earn my keep if that's what you're worried about." Something that might have been a laugh tugged at his mouth, or maybe just breath. "I'm not worried. Plenty to do if you're able." When she stood, her knees buckled. He caught her before she fell, hands strong beneath her arms. The touch was brief, but it left an echo. "Name's Cole," he said, stepping back to give the distance a shape. "Cole Hart. Ruth Ann Carter." Something sharp flickered across his face, the recognition of a name that carried stories behind it. He turned to pour coffee, moving slow, careful. Even across the room she could see the stiffness in his right leg. The way he shifted his weight like standing too long cost more than he let on. "You live here alone?" "Been that way a while." Silence stretched, thick but not cruel. She studied the room again, how everything was clean yet untouched, like a man living inside a memory he didn't dare disturb. "I had people once," she said quietly. "Lost them before I knew how to start over." He raised his eyes, storm gray before rain. He didn't ask for details, and she didn't offer them. Some stories aren't meant to be told right away. He handed her a mug. "To the ones who made it," he said. She almost smiled. "And the ones still trying." They drank in truce. Later, when she offered to mend the curtain and set the stores to rights, he only nodded and watched her move, not with judgment, but with the careful curiosity of a man trying to remember what it felt like to let someone stay. When the snow thickened again by afternoon, she found him outside, splitting wood, every strike a grim conversation with his own pain. His leg trembled, effort sat hard along his jaw. "You'll split yourself in 2 if you keep at it," she called. He rested the axe and looked at her, breath steaming. Wouldn't be the first time. There was no self-pity in it, only fact. Up close, she could see what the winter had taken and what it had left. A man once strong, broken in a way the world couldn't see, but he felt each step. "Let me help." He hesitated. "You shouldn't have to. Neither should you." His mouth curved, almost a smile, enough to warm the space between them. Wind picked up, old as the ridge. Inside, the fire waited. As he followed her in, Cole Hart realized it wasn't the storm outside he'd been hiding from. It was the one she carried into his heart. The storm didn't ease. By the second day, snow swallowed the fence posts, the trail, the world beyond the porch. The wind moaned through the cracks like an old ghost refusing to leave. Inside, the fire became their clock. When it flared, they spoke. When it dimmed, silence took its turn. Cole moved with quiet purpose, feeding flames, mending a stirrup strap, checking the rifle by the door. Every now and then, Ruth Ann caught him watching her reflection in the window instead of the weather. She kept busy, sweeping, sorting beans, warming her hands at the kettle, anything to soften the weight of 2 strangers sharing one small room while the world froze. At dusk, he said, "You can take the bed tonight. Floor's fine for me. You've been on that leg all day. I don't sleep much anyhow." They compromised. 2 pallets by the hearth, the fire between them like a line they'd both agreed not to cross. For a long time, the only sound was wind and wood settling. Her voice moved softly across the glow. How'd it happen? He didn't ask what she meant. Stampede. 3 winters back. Doctor said the leg would heal. It did. Just not all the way. You ever wish it hadn't? His eyes lifted, storm gray again. Every morning. Till now. The words hung there. She turned to the fire so he wouldn't see the heat rise in her cheeks. That night she woke to a noise outside, the slow, deliberate crunch of snow. Cole was already sitting up, rifle in hand, listening. They waited, breath held. A soft snort, hooves pawing, then silence. Deer, he said, lowering the gun, but the unease didn't leave. In the morning he found boot tracks along the tree line, half filled by drift. Not his, not hers. He smoothed them out with a branch without mentioning it. Some truths buy time when they're kept a little longer. The next day she cooked. Not much to work with. Beans, a precious piece of salt pork, a handful of flour. She made a stew worthy of better years and brought it to the table like a sacrifice that might call luck. He tried not to stare when she bowed her head a moment before the first bite. You pray often? He asked. Often enough, she said. But not always for what people think. What do you pray for? Steady hands, she said, and a place to put them. Later, she found a small wooden box on the mantel, carved with initials worn smooth by years. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. A man doesn't keep that sort of thing unless the keeping is the only way not to break. That evening she insisted he sit while she mended his torn sleeve. He grumbled but obeyed, the fire throwing their shadows tall across the wall. Her fingers brushed his wrist as she worked. Steady, sure. He hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone touched him without reason. You're a hard man to help, Cole Hart, she said without looking up. And you, he answered, are a harder woman to forget. The wind fell away to a hush. She set the needle down. He lifted his eyes. For a breath neither moved, just the old cabin listening to 2 people remember how to be alive. By the 4th day the storm was only a memory, thin snow slumping to mud around the porch. The silence that followed felt wrong, too still to trust. Ruth Ann stood by the window, steam curling from her cup. Cole repaired the corral fence, limp slower in the thaw. Even the horses seemed to know something was coming. Their ears flicked toward the ridge before the sound arrived, the distant thud of hooves. Too many for travelers, moving too fast for peace. Cole froze mid-swing. He looked up at her through the window, eyes sharpening to a color she hadn't seen before. Danger made him alive again. He came inside and shut the door with a calm that made her pulse jump. How many? 4, maybe 5. Might be those men hunting for survivors of the attack. He took the rifle from the mantel, checked the chamber, handed her a small pouch of rounds. Back room. I'm not leaving you. He met her stare, the space between them filled with the things neither had said. He nodded once. Stay low. The riders crested the ridge, voices carrying like vultures on a thermal. She caught fragments through the walls, names, laughter, a promise to find the last witness. The first shot split the air. Glass shattered. Cole fired back, the recoil yanking his injured leg but not his aim. Ruth Ann worked beside him, passing cartridges with steady hands, counting breaths between thunder. A bullet kissed his shoulder and burned through flesh. He dropped to one knee. She dragged him to cover and pressed cloth to the wound. Hold still. Didn't plan on moving anyhow. When the dust settled, 2 horses bolted and the rest turned tail, leaving curses and gun smoke drifting like bad weather. Cole slumped against the wall. She bound the wound tight and held his gaze till the shaking stopped in both their hands. "They would have killed us," she said. He looked at her the way a man looks at the first green after a long winter. "Then it's good I finally had a reason worth fighting for." She swallowed. "You shouldn't talk like that." "Like what?" "Like I matter more than your life. You don't get to tell a man what brings him back to living." Night pressed close, but it didn't feel like danger anymore. It felt like shelter. The cabin smelled of powder and rain, yet the air between them carried something new, the scent of warmth returning. He tried to make a dry remark and failed. She stayed. Sometimes that's the only medicine that works. When the outside storm finally went quiet, the silence inside grew almost shy. He lifted his eyes to hers, uncertain, searching. For years that look had belonged to a man half alive, eating by habit, sleeping like a watchman. Now it trembled with want, not the kind that burns through everything, but the kind that heals where fire once ran wild. She brushed a lock of hair from his brow. "You should rest." He caught her hand before she could move, fingers rough and reverent. "Can't," he said, "not yet." Firelight wavered, laying gold across the floorboards, painting her skin the color of honeyed pine. Neither of them moved, afraid a breath might break whatever had taken years to find its way here. Then he reached, slow, and cupped her face. The touch was light, as if asking permission from his own heart. She leaned into it. Something inside him broke open, not like a bone, but like a thaw. He bent until his forehead rested against hers. No promises, no claims, just the quiet truth of two people lost to the world who'd found each other in the wreckage. The blankets shifted as they moved closer, sharing a pallet that felt too small for the years they'd spent alone. The fire dipped low, and the rest of the night belonged to the sound of their breathing and the exchange of words that didn't need to be spoken. When the flame finally coaled to red, the scene gentled to black. Dawn climbed slow. Light slipped through the chinks and brushed the walls pale gold. "Looks like the storm's gone," she said without opening her eyes. "Maybe not all of it," he answered, and smiled like a man surprised to hear his own voice sound easy. The days that followed were a new kind of winter, warmer but watchful. They walked the tree line together and found where boot prints had been, half filled by thaw. He taught her the lay of the land. She taught him how to bind a wound so it would heal clean. She unearthed a music box from a drawer, its song thin but stubborn. He hadn't opened it since the stampede took his brother. "We were two men then," he said simply. She didn't offer sorry. She set the box on the mantel and wound it once. The tune rasped into the room and stayed. A week later, a neighbor rode in, a man with windburned cheeks and a good hat, asking if the gunshots had been coyotes getting too bold. Cole said they were, and offered coffee. The neighbor talked about town, a drifter with a busted cheekbone bragging in the saloon about a train hit gone sideways, swearing he'd finish the job come spring. When the neighbor left, Ruth Ann and Cole looked at each other and didn't say the man's name. Some words just called trouble by its first one. Spring didn't come all at once. It crept in like a skittish colt learning to trust the light. Snow pulled back from the gullies. Rivers woke up. Calves tested their legs. Ruth Ann took to standing on the porch mornings, coffee in hand, watching mist lift off the valley. She'd never owned land, but the way she stood there, it seemed the land might be starting to belong to her. Cole joined her most mornings, limp, softened, shoulder healed into a line he could live with. "You should be resting," she'd tease. "If I rest any more, the ranch will forget it had a man in charge." "It's doing just fine with a woman watching over it." He laughed low and easy, still surprised by the sound. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was the earned kind, the kind that says a fight is over and the breath after it can be trusted. One afternoon, They rode the fence together and found the place where the rails sagged. He fixed the post. She held the wire. The simple work felt like a vow exchanged in daylight. At the far field, prairie smoke bloomed purple along the draws. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Used to think that's all I wanted," he said, "till you showed in that storm. Now I think about building something worth staying for." Her fingers found his, threaded through, held. The gesture carried the weight of every mile they'd walked alone. They did see him again, the drifter with the brag and the busted cheek. He showed himself on the ridge one evening when the light went copper and long. He sat his horse and watched the cabin, the fence, the woman on the porch shelling peas. Cole stepped into the yard with the rifle braced loose and easy. The man looked at the set of Cole's shoulders, at the way the woman didn't flinch, at the fact that land well kept has a kind of quiet that doesn't scare. He turned his horse without a word and rode back the way he came. Some men test a door and learn it's latched from the inside. A year passed since the great storm. Spring returned, not cautious but bold, painting the valley in greens Cole hadn't noticed since boyhood. The wind that used to carry the cry of storms now brought the sound of hammers and laughter, and the river working itself free. Ruth Ann stood at the porch rail with coffee in her hand, and a light she carried under her heart. Each sunrise looked wider, like the sky had finally learned how to breathe. He joined her, hat pushed back, eyes narrowed against the bright. "If I rest any more," he started. She bumped his shoulder. "Hush." He smiled and didn't argue. The silence that settled then was the kind people travel years to find. "You know," she said, eyes on the horizon, "if you're set on building something worth staying for, you'll need more than one worker." He searched her face and found the answer there. The old hurts, the gunfight scars, the leg that would always complain in weather. All of it seemed to take one step back. He bent and pressed his lips to her forehead, then down to the quiet promise beneath her palm. "Sounds like a good day to start again," he whispered. It was. The neighbor came by with a letter from town, a claim form with 2 names written where one would have been easier. They signed it at the kitchen table, the ink drying in a sun patch on the wood. A meadowlark called from the fence post like it had news to tell. The wind swept the grass, warm and forgiving. The first true spring light bathed the valley. They stood there, quiet, steady, whole, knowing the hardest road doesn't always lead you home. Sometimes it turns under your feet while you're walking, and what you build together becomes the place you were headed all along. And if folks in town told the story later, they said a storm nearly took them, and a quieter one gave them back. They said a man who'd forgotten how to feel met a woman who'd never stopped, and between them, the land remembered what it was for: growing things. The music box on the mantel played some evenings, thin and stubborn. He didn't wind it every night. He didn't need to. There was a new song in the house now, and it didn't have to be taught. When the baby came, the first cry folded itself into the rafters like it had always been there waiting. He held them both with hands that had learned tenderness the hard way. She rested her cheek against his chest and listened to the rhythm that had once been a war drum settle into a steady, ordinary beat. It was the best sound in the world. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. The valley said it for them. River bright, grass high, fence tight, sky wide. It was enough. And when wind moved over the ridge on certain afternoons, it sounded not like a warning anymore, but like a promise kept. If this love story touched your heart, show some love back, like the video and subscribe for more. Tell me in the comments, should their love story continue or end with mystery?